Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us to this meeting of Draw to Perform online program. This program allows us to extend the discussion around performative drawing and contemporary drawing. And it is a great honor for me to collaborate and talk today with Susan Schwalb, an artist with a great reputation who works with traditional but yet experimental techniques like silver point and metal point and many more actually. I think it's going to be an exciting meeting, and you're most welcome to participate in the discussion. And thank you so much, Susan, for inviting us to your new studio in New York City.
My pleasure.
We're going to start by a short bio about Susan. So here I go. I'll just, sorry. Okay.
Susan Schwalb is one of the foremost figures in the revival of the ancient technique of silver point drawing in America. Her work is represented in most of the major public collections, including the Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, the National Gallery, Washington, D.C., the British Museum, London, the Brooklyn Museum, New York, Victoria and Albert Museum, London, and the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford, England. Her current drawings juxtapose a wide variety of metals: silver, gold, brass, copper, platinum, pewter, bronze, and aluminium, to obtain soft shifts in tone and color. Horizontal bands evoke an atmosphere of serenity, and the shimmer of light on the surface created by the metals is quite unlike any of the usual effects of metal point. Schwalb's work is resolutely abstract, and her handling of the technique is extremely innovative. Paper is torn and burnt to create an emotionally free and dramatic contrast to the precise linearity of silver point. In other works, silver point is combined with flat expanses of acrylic paint or gold leaf. Sometimes subtle shifts of tone and color emerge from the juxtaposition of a wide variety of metals. In 2015, her work was included in Drawing with Silver and Gold, From Leonardo to Jasper Johns, at the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., which traveled to the British Museum, London. Schwalb was one of the only 3 living artists included in the show. In 2018, a retrospective entitled A Luminous Line, 40 Years of Metal Point Drawing by Susan Schwalb was exhibited at the Arkansas Art Center, Little Rock. She's the co-author of Silver Point and Metal Point Drawing, a complete guide to the medium, published in 2019 by Routledge/Vogel Press, UK and US.
Yes, so this is you.
This is me. This is the book that was just talked about. There's been, the best place to buy it is from Routledge online, and they have been having buy 2 books from them, get 25% off. So you can buy one for yourself and one for your friend. And the other thing I wanted to show you before I show you my technique is this show that was at the BM in British Museum, and then was supposed to travel all over the UK. Now, it didn't during the pandemic, but I read recently that it's on a newsletter from the BM that they're going to start up their tour again. And I have a 4-part burnt piece that the British Museum owns in this show, which I unfortunately have not seen. So if you don't know what metal point is, and I know Ram does beautiful metal point drawings, his work is featured in our book, but it's simply drawing with metal on a prepared surface. So if I take off my silver ring, and I just made a mark on a prepared surface. So the silver, of course, I don't draw with my good jewelry, but that is the idea. So I have a selection of tools here. Can you see? Because the image on my phone is so small of me that I can't tell.
Yeah, it's
So
perfect.
it's a wonderful copper. You can get, this is silver, this is copper. These are made by an artist in Hawaii. We have a gold point. Mostly artists use mechanical drawing tools.
Mhm.
I have to add little holders to give me more support because after 40 plus years, my hands are damaged. This is a handmade tool, very similar to a Renaissance tool. It's made of boxwood, done by Jan Boesten of the Netherlands. And he gives wonderful, wonderful workshops in person and online on everything Renaissance. I advise checking him out. But you can draw. So I have a couple of different kinds of paper here. This is terraskin or stone paper. And so I even have like a silver knife to make wide marks. Early work, I used to use flat pieces of metal to make marks. And I also use all kinds of metallic wools. Think steel wool, but it's not. So I have bronze. I have brass. I have aluminum, which always makes a really nice dark mark, and copper. And I recently, believe me, this was expensive, this teeny piece of silver wool done by Galvin Gardner, who's been making all sorts of things with silver. He's been casting things, etc. So what you have to know, makes this so hard? First of all, everything will change color. Most metals tarnish. It's not an easy task to erase. It's very difficult. There are tricks, and we talk about them in our book, but sometimes sandpaper works. It depends on the ground. And I use a combination of gesso grounds, handmade by myself mostly, and these days, sometimes commercial papers. A popular paper, which I no longer recommend, is plight paper because I've had some problems with it. So it comes in colors, it has a beautiful surface, but I discovered that the white and the ivory ate up my drawing. I have a series that literally disappeared, which it shouldn't. So with that, Ellie, I have my assistant here.
Wait. Can you hear me,
Oh.
Susan?
Yes.
Just before the tour, I would like to ask you a question, if possible. So how did you get to work with a tool and with a drawing tool that it's hard to erase, that it's tarnish, that is
How did I get started?
I said to you in the before in our previous talk that I considered you the most performative artist that I talked with, because there's so many changes happening while you are working with metalpoint, and it's always in flux. So how did you decided to focus yourself?
Well, after art school, I graduated from Carnegie Mellon in 1965, and I was doing prints. I loved printmaking, and I was making a living pre-computer as a graphic designer, a sort of living. And then I was drawing with inks and colored inks. Now, you can't erase ink either. And I was looking for finer and finer and finer lines. And a friend was experimenting with this technique. And I said, what is it? And she handed me her tool, and I made a mark. And then I went out and bought materials.
Yeah.
And within a year, my whole life had changed.
Yeah.
And there's only one point, around, some years ago, there was a point where I stopped working in metal point for a couple of years and did very free metallic painting. So still using metals. And then I had a show of that work in Boston. And someone asked me at my artist talk, was I still working in metal point? And I said, well, I was thinking about doing this outer space work in metal point. And so I began to do it, and then, you know, saw something and started working with pieces of flat metal. I created a holder here for this one made out of rubber. And the rest is history. That work, my Strata series, is really popular.
And how do you work
I
with
can't get away from this medium. I mean, people call me the Silver Point Queen and all of these silly things, but I'm just still pushing the medium further and further. And you're right, it's totally transformative. And let me show you something in a drawing that, let's do the orchid. I'm going to show you my earliest series.
Just turning the camera.
My earliest series were quite a number of works based on dried flowers. And if you could see it here, there's a little tarnishing in greens, which sometimes happens in copper. I pulled this drawing out for a show, and we saw it, the curator and I. And I accept the drawing as is, because why not? How did that, only that little, I have no idea. Now I have up the works Graham was interested in. These early, this was after my orchid series. I began to work with smoke and fire. And this is quite a large drawing, as you can see. I used mostly copper point, but some silver point, and a candle to create the smoke, but the dark part and the things that come out, and then I drew over it.
Ellie, sorry, can I ask you to maybe get closer to this
Sure.
drawing?
We have another one that's a little easier to see.
Okay. Wow.
And then there's this piece, and I'll pick up a really small work, which you'll be able to see. So here, as I kept burning the work, it got torn, it got charred.
Oh
and I'm told I aged the paper 50 years when I did this, but so what? Let me show you a much smaller image, which is it's called parchment. And I did loads of these small sized pieces. Also here, this is the wax dripping from my candle. I loved having that happen. One more. These were from my retrospective. That's why they're all framed up. This has a lot more drawing on it. This was a very unusual paper that doesn't exist. It was called video media paper. And I have what might be the last 40 sheets because a friend died and I inherited her paper. So let me show you some recent work.
Susan, sorry, before we move on, I would like to ask you one question about it. So you choose in the beginning an experimental medium to work with, drawing, but then you added the component of burning and working with the candle. It's so gentle and so. Like it can erase immediately if you don't taking care of, right? So
I don't know, when I had my retrospective and the person who was writing the essay came to visit me and look at all the works before it went to Arkansas. And actually the museum is now called the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts. They're under construction. They'll be reopening in the fall of 22. But I really couldn't remember why I started to burn the work and how. I think I started with matches. I looked in all my journals and I could barely find a mention of why I did it. So mean, this piece is from 1981. I started to burn my work at the end of the 70s until the early 80s. The work is extremely fragile, and at some point, I had to stop doing this work. So let's swing around. We'll pass my great view, and you'll even see the Hudson River out the window. This was always my dream studio. I sublet a space and
We can hear the sound.
you have to come closer, Ellie.
I'm showing you.
The street.
They couldn't hear me. So I had sublet in this studio in 20 years ago. And I always wanted to rent a space here, and it was never available. And during COVID, people started to not be able to afford their spaces. This is not a cheap thing that I'm doing, but it's a present to myself. So I have here much more recent work.
They can hear you.
Oh, okay. So these are on wood panels, and you can see they bevel back. This is a series called Variations. And the
Susan,
work, yes?
can you talk a little bit about the way you decide to frame those works? Because it's quite unique, the
Well, I mean, these are
dimensional
not
approach.
framed. Let me put gloves on so I can handle one of these.
They are mounted on a surface.
No, it's not mounted.
Oh, really?
I
Okay.
I have the wood panels made for me. I'm not a carpenter. I was never very good at that. And so here's the back. And I have the wood. I gesso and seal the wood, paint a color, and draw straight on it. At one point, I used to glue paper, but I never glued a finished drawing onto this. It's always original.
So you're drawing on the wood?
Yeah, with gesso and
Oh, with
paint.
gesso. I see. Okay.
You know, I have to seal the wood and then gesso it, many layers.
And that you consider as your painting, because
Yes,
I saw that
because
you
it's not on paper. This is what a curator once told me.
Yeah.
It's painting because it's on freestanding. Now, these are brand new works here. I was doing this variation series on paper, and then I was making another one, and halfway through, I thought, this looks finished. And so it became my new series called Elegy. And I've done a few. Spitting on my work here, that's bad. And there is also, I'm in the middle of a piece here. This is a finished work, this one. This is a bit larger. These are 24 by 24 inches. I'm sorry, I don't know the centimeters. We're very retarded here in the US. We're the only people who still use inches and feet and all of miles. And this one I'm in the middle
sorry,
of.
just a sec, Susan. Is there the one that you just pointed at, is it silver point, or there are few?
That's
metals?
aluminum. It's aluminum and silver or gold. I would have to look behind the work.
And you always making your ground, the color ground by yourself, right? So
at this point, if I'm going to work on a white ground, usually it's on paper, but I have a couple of panels from years ago. I have 2 white panels, but usually I want some kind of color. Why work on a wood and all of that? Otherwise, I'll use a commercial paper that I don't have to gesso, that's pure white. And this piece is in the middle. I just got this far. I need to do the second side and see what's going to happen next. This side is in aluminum point, and I'm not sure what I'm doing here, either gold or it's like this drawing is also in the middle, and this is gold, and I have to decide what I'm putting on the other side.
yeah, the gold is usually quite gray, surprisingly, right?
Well, the gold doesn't tarnish,
Yeah.
and I think put the back and put me back at the table here.
Thanks. Thanks, Ellie.
No problem.
So gold doesn't tarnish usually, and it usually looks grayish, like most of the metals do when you first put them down.
Right.
Now on a black ground, gold sometimes looks gold. You can see the reflections on the surface, especially from the side point. Copper will always turn mostly a yellow or yellowish green color. However, this magic paper that I mentioned, this video media, which I am going to send you, Ram, I just haven't gotten to it yet.
You sent me like 2 small pieces. I never
Did
had,
I?
Yeah, I never had the chance to work on them.
Oh, I couldn't remember. And this paper, all the metals look different. The copper looks reddish. The silver looks grayish. The gold looks brownish. I mean, it has a coated surface. This was a paper made for printing. Almost all commercial papers, that the ones we still have, and we don't have a lot anymore, were not made for silver point. They were made for different printing things. The only one is this terraskin paper, which you can't tear, but you can cut, or the stone paper. It's sold in the UK under a different name. This is paper from Canada. Yeah. Sometimes you can write to them and they'll send you a sample, especially if you're doing workshops. I've done that. So there's all kinds of possible grounds. Artists I know have worked on the wall. I did a wall drawing many years ago when I was doing the burnt work on a gallery wall, and I don't have very good photos of it because before these fancy cameras and phones where you have a great camera with you all the time. So so can I answer questions
No,
for
just
anybody?
a sec. Yeah, no, just a sec before I opening it. Sorry. And I'll start by asking you a few questions, if it's okay.
Sure.
At the first meeting that we did online, you were talking about something that is really for me interesting because I'm getting there, and you talked about changing the way drawing as time went by because physical obstacles. Can you talk more about it and how it changed your work and why? And yeah.
Well, I was drawing a lot with pieces of metal, and I was pressing with my index finger when I made the marks, like so. And eventually I hurt my finger. I strained it, and my hand doctor kept giving me cortisone shots, and he kept saying, you have to change your work. You can't go on this way. This is you're not going to be able to go ahead. It isn't something that can be, I've had hand surgery from trigger fingers, but what I was doing was straining the whole area here. And so I had always worked with stylists. I mean, my orchid work, the burnt work, all I used different styluses. And I got to thinking about an artist I know. I don't know if you met her, Ram. She lives now in France, Marietta Huffera. And I introduced her to metal point, and she made some wonderful pieces. And I thought, she didn't make what I thought she would make. So I did. I had in my mind, knowing her other work, what I thought she would do, but she did the opposite. That's because she's an artist. Why would she do what I imagined? And so I went back to the stylist in a different way. That's 2010. And I have no need to go back to working with these anymore, at least at the moment. And I do love working with these wools if I want tones or other things, and as many metals as I can come up with.
Yes.
I work with precious metals and cheap metals. So, and here's a sweet tool. It's much like what was done in the Renaissance. This was made by an artist in the American Southwest. But Jan, I don't think he sells them. He just made them for me. He always makes his own tools from these pieces of wood and then inserts a metal point in them. Now, I sharpen my tools mostly on a sandstone. I have a couple kinds here. A lot of artists, my co-author, Tom Mazzullo, a wonderful artist, he uses a file. So I saw him sharpen a few of my tools and it was perfect. I'd like him to be sitting here all the time sharpening my tools because it, for me, would seem laborious and I just couldn't do it. But then he does very, very precise, small images. You should look him up.
Sure. One more question is, I know that first time we talked, you were asking me about my practice, and as it quite performative, you were specifically asking about the mistakes or the unexpected things that happening while you are working, and sometimes my work is torn, and sometimes there are holes, and you were asking me what do I do or how do I feel about it, and I remember that I told you that in most cases yeah, I accept the situation or destroy, but rarely I destroyed things that kind of were unexpected for me in a way. Do you have?
Well, I do the same. If something comes out differently, that's an old example, but I mean, these all look like all the lines are perfect, and I do use a straight edge, but they're not. And I don't want them to be perfect. I'm not a machine. So I'm happy if they're a little irregular, or I just go over it. I just keep going. If a piece really doesn't work, or what happens for me is that sometimes, particularly with commercial paper, but even with the ground I make, there's something on the ground that resists the metal for some reason. Maybe I touched it too many times with my hand and there's grease or oils from my hand. And eventually you throw it out and start over. You don't like it. But I'll show you if I can find it quickly, Ram's piece in the book here. It's at the bottom there.
Yeah, it's a three-dimensional metal point.
Well, that's why we have it in the book, because it's different and unusual. When we made a decision of what artists to include, I wanted artists from around the world. I wanted men and women, and I wanted people approaching this from many different ways. Now, I'm interested in abstraction. My co-author is image-based, and we tried to divide this.
Balance.
So we had image-based artists, but ones who did more traditional. I'm not interested in art that tries to be like the Renaissance. We can't. Yeah. We didn't train like they did. So for figurative artists, it's people who do unusual things figuratively that are not classic. And we've had lots of them in the book. Whether it's, I love this portrait, but it's a close-up and it has metals. I think she has silver leaf on hers. To traditional, but not traditional portraits. This one is by A.J. Smith, and the bottom one is by the late Ben Schechter. And this is done by Marjorie Williams Smith, who does only flowers and plants. They show a lot together. They live in Arkansas.
Thanks. Last question for me. I would like to ask you about, you have a long career now, and you I guess when you started, it was quite difficult back then to be a female artist. Can you a little bit talk about this subject, please?
When I started, I had at least 2 strikes against me. I was a woman and I worked only on paper. It took a long time before I evolved. I tested canvas. I didn't really like it, which is then I went to wood. And people would say, these drawings are very nice, but where are your paintings? Where is your sculpture? Now, of course, you would never be asked that in today's art world, ever. And even 10 years ago. But what can I say? And now the problem, and I didn't know anyone when I got out of art school. I went to school in Pittsburgh. I came back to New York, where I was from. And I really didn't know a lot of people. And it wasn't until I joined Early Women Artists Group, Women in the Arts, Women's Caucus for Art, that I met loads of artists. But you can't have a career without knowing other people professionally who would know where there are shows and all sorts of things. But these days, my work is very reductive and sometimes minimal. It's a strange time, anyway, coming out of this pandemic. Yeah. But I do hope that my dealer in London, Patrick Haida, Contemporary Arts, he hasn't mentioned what upcoming show. My last show with him was a two-person show in 2019. I'm hopeful that in the next year he will show the work or have it featured at an art fair, which is how he makes his money.
And then we can see your work here in London again.
I hope so. I mean, now the Courtauld just bought 8 works of mine. I hope they eventually make them available. They're in their new building now. I don't know that they'll put them up, but both the BM and the Courtauld, once you can access their study rooms, because the British Museum owns about 8 or 9 pieces of mine, you can ask to see them. And Patrick, of course, always has my work. Excellent. So he is open. So you go gallery hours or you make an appointment, and he's happy to show you panels and works on paper, especially if you have money.
I think it's a great time to open the discussion for you guys. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and maybe put a question to Susan, please. Do you have somebody?
I certainly have some questions. Oh,
please.
You still?
No, I want to see their faces. What are you doing?
I thought they were going to be on chat.
No, ask them.
I'll do the view, the gallery view now. Here you go. Can you see it?
Okay, I can see it. Can you see everybody, Susan?
Well, I can see whoever talks.
Okay.
You know, on a phone.
Okay, so thank you. It's really, really interesting. I know nothing about silver point, so it's fascinating. And I was very interested in, we talked about the grounds, and at the beginning, you mentioned parchment, and then you didn't mention it again. And I wondered if you did much work.
Oh, no, that was the name of the artwork. I never worked.
Right.
I did do a piece on parchment for a special project called Women of the Book, where we were sent parchment and had to illustrate an aspect from the Bible. But that is what the ancients did. That's what the Renaissance, they often used parchment to do the work.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because yes, because the historical sort of process. And I wondered, because I'm particularly interested in parchment and vellum, and there's some, you were talking about surfaces, and there's you can get contemporary vegetarian vellum, which is not made of calf skin, and it's quite tough, and it has this funny sort of velvety tooth, and I just wondered whether that sort of material would work well with this.
Really hard to put a ground on that. Take my word for it.
So you have to have
I had not the highest level. I think if you get very expensive, and I don't know if I was sent, I don't own the piece anymore.
Right.
It's in Israel, but it was a project. They took all our pieces, they put them together. It's never had the tour. It was supposed to have a book. I haven't seen the book, but they made prints. You know, it was exhibited in a biennale in Jerusalem some years ago.
Yeah,
but I would say any surface that you want to try, test it. You know, I mean, say the classic thing is paper or wood. I did experiment with canvas. Problem with canvas is that weave. And you know what I did is 10 coats of gesso to turn it into paper. So for me, it wasn't really a great idea. That's why I went to wood or masonite, which I did a lot of panels on, which is also a kind of wood. The key thing with wood is you must seal the surface. There's a lot of products. I use something called Kills. There's another product called Bin, but you must seal it, even masonite, because the oils and residue in that will someday come right into your artwork where you won't want it. So I hope that helps. Is that abstract work I see behind you? I can't really see what you're making.
That's a very interesting question. So some of it is, it's actually frottage work. The big ones are frottage, and the smaller ones here are photogravures from film stills, but I used all different sorts of mediums.
So I've been encouraging artists to take this up, and that you don't have to use a tool with a very fine piece of silver. You know, you can make your tools out of anything. You can use aluminum foil. There's an artist in the UK who uses aluminum foil to make her marks. And Erica Winstone, who lives in London, combines silver point with video projections. So, I mean, artists explore this in many different ways. There is, you know, the beginning of a renaissance of this technique. It's not as obscure as it used to be. I hope our books sold very well during the pandemic. I think artists were locked up and wanted to try a new technique. But you know, I recently showed this tool and a knife to a very free abstract artist who uses graphite. And I gave her a piece of commercial paper, and she saw that she could make her big swinging, you know, marks, that it didn't have to be little precise images that Dürer and Da Vinci and many others made. That is the point. Those people made what they made. We have to do, even when you do figuration. I'm always looking for something. Here's a beautiful piece by Joseph Stella, who you'll know from his Brooklyn Bridge paintings. He's combining metal point with, I think it's graphite and colored pencil. He did fantastic silver point pieces. And then you have an artist. Ellie, can you move this a little closer to me?
Oh, it's okay. We can see. Susan. Oh.
I just want to, this is Leo D. I do not know how he made this work. I have seen it. I've had to use a magnifying glass to see the marks barely. I never got to meet him, so I don't really know how he made it. He's no longer alive. He used to live in New Jersey. So, and this is an artist called Cadmus, who was inspired always by Renaissance art and figuration. And what I like about this piece is the ground, which is put on, I believe, vertically, and he drew the figure horizontally. So you can absolutely see the strokes from his ground. Yeah. I don't want to see that. When I make a new ground, I want it to be as smooth as possible. Yeah, sure. So
that's interesting. Thank you.
Yes, please. You're not. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan and Ram. So I have two questions. I'm very interested in performative drawing. The first question is, if both of you or anybody else can talk about what they think definition of performative drawing is. And the second question, which is linked to the first question, is if the performative is in your work, Susan, if you consider it in the process or in the outcome or result.
Well, remember, this is Ram's project, drawing as performance. He invited me because he saw that particularly in my burnt work, which is why I took it out of my storage racks to show you, was a kind of performance, and it was. I actually took drawings, burnt them, and destroyed them. I did them in nature at one point and made some photo documentation. This is in 1980. I did a piece like that in Denmark. But for me, it's all about process, is my work. And the tools and the medium lead me ahead. I'm inspired by nature and I'm inspired by other people's work. I go so much to galleries and museums. You know, all artists steal. So we're always looking for ideas, and often it's a color or combination of colors that I see in someone's work that interests me. It's hard to tell. At this point, I'm just enjoying the pleasure of seeing art. It was so horrible for months and months and months. You could see nothing. And at that point, nothing was still open. I went downtown in Soho where there were all these political paintings on, people had covered all the glass storefronts with plywood. And artists were making amazing artworks, amazing. I mean, some were graffiti, but many was a political project. And I was amazed by it. And it was the first art I saw before the museums began to open here in New York City.
That's a chance to thank you for sharing all those tours that you're doing in the heart of Manhattan, and brings to many people. I'm sharing it on Draw to Perform, the Facebook group. So thanks very much. Overall, you're quite generous with sharing your knowledge, and so thanks again for this.
Well, it's my pleasure. My feeling is if you can make my work, I'll stop. Now, once somebody brought me, they'd seen a show of mine in New York. He lived in Western Mass. I was living outside of Boston. And he came to visit me. He wanted to see my tools and this and that. And he brought a piece that was mimicking this. I don't have the piece up now. I took it down to put the burnt work up. But this gridded work, this harmonization work, it's all on my website, these pieces. And I got very nervous because he was sort of doing a pastiche, bad one, of my work. And I asked him to destroy the piece that he showed me. Since it was an experiment, I said, please destroy this. You know, I haven't seen him do metal point. He's a painter. I've seen all, and sometimes sculpture, and I've seen this all online on Facebook. People should friend me on Instagram and Facebook, and because I'm girl reporter when I go to galleries and museums. I am a writer, and I have done art writing, usually interviews, not criticism particularly. I wrote for a number of publications in New England. And at this point, after writing the book, which took well over a year, I'm not so interested in writing articles. It's enough to try to work at this point in my life.
Before we go to Gemma, that raised hand, you're not, I think, would you like to discuss a little bit more about the performative? Because I think you are interested in understanding what is performative drawing. I just will quickly say that the whole idea behind Draw to Perform is the idea of sharing the process, the idea of not just focusing on the final product, but trying to understand how you work with from the beginning till the end with the options that you have of sharing the process. So you can either work with a video, or you can record yourself, or you can take stills of the process. You can share it live on Facebook or whatever. You can do live performances, but also you can work in your private studio with quite interesting materials or techniques. And for me, it's a totally performative attitude. So overall, this is what interesting me, and that's what we're trying to share here. Thank you. Gemma, yes, please, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for sharing everything. And it's amazing to hear you talk, and you're obviously extremely established and successful. I'm interested that you talked about your studio and how it's your dream studio and it's hard for you to afford it. Which, as a kind of new novice artist, it's a surprise to me to hear you say.
Well, I can't afford it if I don't get a better apartment. I have a cruddy little rent crow apartment, and I sold our house, and my husband died, so I have money. I can afford my studio.
Yeah.
You know, but it's on the high end of New York City studios.
Yeah.
But I don't know how old you were, but when I was in my 20s and 30s, I could barely afford a separate studio.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been very good at making money. I mean, I hope my work will start selling again. Patrick will find clients at art fairs, and then I'll get a new agent here in New York City.
Yeah.
But the whole point of being an artist is to make the work that you want to make.
Yeah, and my question is how connected you are to the space, and now that you've found your dream studio, how has that?
I love it here. The light is perfect. I watch the sky.
I'm so jealous.
And then
she's
I'm
sharing
gonna
her
hope that I
dancing
don't
in
screw
the
this
studio.
up.
One of my
But-
favorite things.
How do I turn this, Ellie, so I can, would it just be this way? No,
Turn it towards you. Hold it on. There you go.
I want to show the star space. Okay, what I wanted to do,
Just hold it normal.
oh,
Hold it normal.
oh, okay,
Turn it.
great. I have to have an assistant help. So this, alas, is my life's work here in the first part of the studio, is that we have everything that didn't sell that I own. And then, of course, I have flat files jammed full of drawings. It has scared me how much art I truly have,
Yeah.
but that's what happens. And it's not that I never sold anything, but it's not simple. How do we go back?
And how
We all
much has,
know about it.
how much has being in your dream space changed your work?
I don't think so. I mean, it might over time. I only moved here in October. And this body of work, these variations I was doing in my Long Island City studio. And I did continue that and my harmonization pieces when I came here. And then, you know, I've started a new series. I don't know how many I'll make, but I'm making some of them. So, I mean, the space does influence you. You just don't always know why it does happen.
And would you say you've had spaces where you haven't been as inspired as other spaces?
Excuse me, I'm not understanding.
In terms of other studios, other places where you practiced your work, would you say some places have been less inspiring?
No, it's the studio itself doesn't necessarily inspire anything.
Okay.
It's my traveling. Like I did a lot of traveling in the Southwest, and at that time, all of a sudden, all these reds and ochres crept into my grounds and into my work. And so it really depends. You know, I'm making a new series. I haven't decided if I'm done. There are pieces over here, the blue and the black piece, which relates to a work, and we called it the same title. It's Aurora series. It's very similar to work I did a few years ago, and I just made them. And I'm not looking at those older drawings, but they're
in
here.
there. They're in there.
You know, so I just tried another idea, you know, because I don't know how many works I can make, which is just work at the bottom and a blank top. I don't know that I'll make 50 of those. On the other hand, I don't know. I mean, I listened to a lecture yesterday by the dealer, Hal, what was his second name? Broom, who's a dealer downtown, about estates and artists' work. And it's, everybody is facing this when you get over 60, and then when you get over 70, which is what I am. What are you going to do about all your work? Because if you've been a prolific artist, and unless you became super famous, you know, I doubt that will happen anymore while I'm alive. Like one has, you know, would like to have some more wonderful things happen because it's fun. You know, a friend of mine who's been living in Sweden is American, Marty Edelheit. Her career took off 2 years ago. She's 90.
Yeah.
So this is the story of women artists
Yeah.
who had careers, who showed many places, and it's only, you know, my dealer in London has not understood why a big gallery didn't discover me here. And I know how this happens. They have to see your work somewhere fancy in a museum, or this happened to the artist Zarina, who is from India, Pakistan, was living in New York for so many years. And a big museum curator from the Hammer Museum in LA saw her work in a museum in India. I thought, oh, I like this. And all of a sudden she had a retrospective at the Hammer that went to the Guggenheim, and she had a major New York dealer. Then she died. So she at least saw it at the Guggenheim. That's at least that. You know, I mean, most artists, we don't
Everyone
do
with
this.
his journey.
We don't do this for fame and fortune. I think otherwise you have to do it. My husband was a composer, and he would say to his students who questioned, and he said, if you don't have to write music, stop.
Yeah.
Because these are hard professions. People generally don't appreciate your work, and you just want, you do it because you must. This is part of the air you breathe and the life you're leading. I think it's a great life. We can work till we are almost gone because we can. People with other kinds of careers can't. You know, for example, a dancer, although I saw something online, 100-year-old woman is still dancing. So, what? Any other questions? I know we're over 40
Just a
minutes.
quick one from me, and then we'll go a technical one. I see that you pin your sketches and drawings with the, is it a magnet?
These are magnets.
So it's a magnet wall that you are having there?
No, it's a little tack. They're called magnetic tacks. It's like a thumbtack. And then I have another magnet.
Also, you're putting this one, the white one, onto the wall.
And then this comes right on the top of the artwork. In general, it doesn't damage most paper and images. Occasionally, you have to be careful. You have to test it.
The magnet doesn't make a mark on your drawing?
Well, you know, the magnet, I haven't found that it did, except once. So I'm very careful with it.
Yeah, okay.
But
okay, we're going to iPad that raised his hand. So please, if you'd like to ask a question.
Hi. Good morning. It's 6 a.m. here in New Zealand. I'm so happy to see you all. I have a question about the process. You make a lot of work in your process for exhibition. How do you know when that process has come to an end and you're ready to show? And how much do you edit before you exhibit? So,
well, I mean, if and I don't right now have a show on the horizon except an open studio that I will do here. But you know, when I'm making work and I know when the exhibition is, hopefully you have a sense of the gallery space. So you're planning where you might put something. And then, no, I don't want to back up. Sorry. And I mean, you have to make more than you need for a show. If you need 10 works, you need 20 or 30 works, because not every work is a brilliant work. And hopefully, if it's in a museum or in a gallery, the galleryist or curator will help you curate the show. Now, not all things have. I've shown early on in artist-run galleries. So I had to make the decisions myself, you know, of what to show. But it's always helpful to have, not that dealers necessarily know what's the best work. They know what they think they can sell. Now that's your goal
Yeah.
too, right? If you're showing in a gallery, I wish I had much less work here. I have to go back to a project of donating work to museums that have already purchased my work and, you know, see what you can do. But I will always have, problem is you sell a piece, you've made 5 other pieces. So you never get ahead unless you're, I don't know, one of the many famous people who are household names. So I can't answer that. You just have to have a lot of work. You want to rewrap
Can I
that?
have another
though,
quick
really?
question?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm really interested in your burnt work. Did you come back to that? Did you revisit burning the work and working with smoke and fire? I personally work with a laser cutter, so I'm really interested in that, making work through burning.
I have no interest in going back to that work. What was special for me was the paper I worked with, this commercial paper that doesn't exist. And I tested burning on other surfaces and I didn't like it. And then the work got so fragile, I put it behind me, you know? So personally now I'm not interested, but you never know. Ask me in a year or 3 years. You know,
Yeah.
I'm doing what I'm doing now. Each body of work leads to the next body of work, so.
Well, thank you very much.
We have one more question. Anybody? Or we'll summarize. Is there anybody that would like to ask Susan last more? Okay.
Well, you can always contact me through my website. If you want to ask a question, I'll be happy to answer it by email.
Excellent. So it's right on time, and I would like to thank you so much, Susan, for
It was a pleasure. Thank you. It gave me practice to do a studio talk in this new world.
Yes, and we'll keep in touch, and best of luck with your new work and
Thank you.
work. And see you all in the next Road to Perform program. I guess it will be in July, hopefully. So thank you very much for all of you here that came and participated. Cheers. Bye-bye.